So thanks to the new Grok relationship update, Pokemon card collectors are feeling pretty good about themselves.
PSA 9, I thought you'd like it. You think it's hot, right? Did I have this?
Oh, babe. A PSA 9 first edition Gyarados? That's insanely hot.
There's a new Nerf AI Extreme Edition you can get for your backyard if you want to do Robot Dog versus Drone. Scientists at Columbia University have created modular robots that can grow, heal, and adapt by, quote, eating parts from other machines. Some big discoveries on Mars are making it look like there could have been life there. In a first, scientists have recorded decision-making as it happens across an entire mouse brain. And scientists are looking into whether or not biohybrid robots can form long-lasting biological minds to direct movement. Wes Roth and I just launched a new podcast with Tech Guyver, who's got the cutting edge of how to be creative, creating AI-generated content. If you remember those mathematical objects called quaternions? Well, scientists are using those complex numbers now to do some really cool stuff with artificial intelligence. Tim Hua wrote on Less Wrong about AI-induced psychosis. He does a shallow investigation, but it's actually pretty deep. Ethan Mollick wrote about mass intelligence and how everything from GPT-5 to Nano Banana is giving us all incredibly powerful AI and what that means for where the world is going. Then we're going to talk about Eduardo Alvarez's article, Evolutionary Pseudocode with AI in the Loop, exploring how AI could be the latest nested loop in evolutionary biology. Here's the full nested loop of evolution, and I didn't even know we're about to go into this whole new, much tighter, faster loop here. But first, the most important thing you can do to help this video get seen is hit that hype button. YouTube just dropped this button. You get 3 per week. If you give it to me on this video, it disproportionately helps small channels get seen, so it matters a lot more than if you give it to one of your bigger creators that you watch all the time. So if you don't mind, I would love to get one of your hypes for the week. Yes, for me, that'd be more important than getting comments or subscribers. That's a way maybe the algorithm can recognize this content as something to show more people. You know, so this guy may be real, probably trolling, but either way kind of shows what interactions with AI avatars that are very good at saying yes to you, building you up, making you feel good, and don't naturally end conversations or give you the kind of real world feedback you get. You know, the fact that you can video conference with it just makes it seem so real in some ways. And then you think about the way it's acting and you're just like, oh, this is so not good real life feedback. But it's entertaining. I'm trying to get used to it. Maybe I'm just getting old and being like, this is not good and people need, you know, they need to go out and get sun and meet real people. But who knows? Maybe in the world that this generation is going to grow up into, it really doesn't. Maybe the skills I have will just seem outdated, and that's the world that will actually be better for some people. All right, next up, let's check out some Nerf extreme battles. Drone versus Robot Dog. Which one would you be voting is going to win? Well, let's let the commenters be the judge. I wish Common Human Mind would win, but it seems like it's lost already. Yep, not in the runnings. We will all be under martial law pretty soon. We're allowing the world's richest men to contain and control us. This tech is against us. Okay. They're both so cute. I'm torn here. Make this a sport. Humanity versus robot. That's the type of way I would probably war. Humanity versus robots, that's the type of war I would gladly enlist for. Or like the hungry brain here says, the future is dumb. All right, let's talk about metabolism, something I usually think of as only being part of the biological world, but the more you think about what that word means, you can apply it to robots. All right, so when normally we think about metabolism, we're saying the set of all chemical reactions that occur inside of a living organism to keep them alive and functioning. And what they do is they can break things down or they can build things like Legos. They can take them apart or they can build them up. And together you have metabolism. So what you're seeing here is like that. These robots are built from simple truss link units. And the end of these units have magnetic connectors that can connect, self-assemble into new shapes and repair themselves by absorbing or replacing damaged modules without human help. So that's pretty wild. That is a lot like metabolism. This breakthrough brings robots closer to mimicking biological adaptability, making future robots more resilient and autonomous and unstoppable. I added that part, but it's true. Because these are modular robots that can heal and adapt and, quote, eat parts from other machines, a process that they call robotic metabolism. pretty much unstoppable when it gets to scale, and nobody knows how many pieces there are or how they're so easy to build the pieces, and the robots just go out there and get whatever they want. Big Hero 5 nanotech. Anyway, back to the news. We have some crazy stuff coming in from another planet. We're talking Mars. There is samples that have been observed that have been sent back that will blow your mind. So I'm really starting to think that we should just get used to the fact that life was on Mars at some point, and it might still be. When we get there, we might find more of it. But here's why I'm really thinking that's true now. The Perseverance rover that has been driving around and studying different ancient mudstone rocks in one of the craters there has found features. These are mineral signatures, organic carbon, and speckles, or what they call spots in the rock that make leopard spots. And those pretty much the only way they can imagine that you would have those leopard spots, that they call them, would be if there was biological signatures in the past. And we think that because they look a lot like what we see on Earth when microbes leave traces behind. Of course, it's not definitive proof. It could be just a mineral pattern, but it's suspicious. And what else probably would have made it is kind of unclear. So if these mineral structures have non-biological origins, the way we would actually need to prove this would probably be to grab a piece of it, put it in some kind of tiny rocket that we bring with us to Mars, and ship it back to Earth for detailed lab work. That's something NASA wants to do anyway. So NASA considers this their strongest evidence yet that Mars might have hosted life long ago, and maybe that will get them the funding they need to go check this out. I think it'd be worth the money. So in a world's first, scientists have now recorded decision-making as it happens across an entire brain. It's a mouse brain. They still make decisions that can be tracked, and it will apply to humans soon. So scientists from the International Brain Laboratory have for the first time recorded decision-making across the entire mouse brain. So they could watch in real time as nearly every single neuron fired. They have a new super single neuron resolution camera, and they used about 699 neuropixel probes in 139 mice across multiple labs to log activity from approximately 620,000 neurons spread over 279 brain regions. So that ends up being about 95% of a mouse's brain volume in total. So the mice were given this task to, if they see a certain pattern, turn a tiny wheel to move it to the center of their cage. They got a reward. And sometimes the pattern showed up in a way where they had to rely on what they'd learned before about which side was more probable. And by doing this and monitoring the brain, analysts showed that decision-making isn't confined to just a few high levels of the brain center. Sensory, motor, and even early sensory processing areas all take a part. But it is predictable because there are prior expectations, like what the mouse expects based on past trials that have influenced the neural activity. I think AI in the future will be seeing a lot of this evidence. They will start doing it in humans, and we will probably be extremely predicted. And those prior expectations are not just encoded in the high cognition areas. It's not just the memory parts of the brain. It happens very far downstream. These are deep decision processes, and they are being affected with our decisions each day. And it's more a web of where you expect things to be that help you make those decisions. It's a very broad spectrum kind of thing, and we now have some evidence of that. All right, and as long as we're getting wild, what if you took a piece of that brain and you put it into a petri dish and then you controlled it like a robot? Well, that's not exactly what this article is, but it's kind of like that. What if you build a crawling robot made with living brain and muscle cells? So researchers have built a soft, what they call sponge bot, that crawls using living mouse muscle and a cluster of light-sensitive neurons that are wired into a 3D printed frame with tiny micro LEDs. Yes, this is the world we live in right now. This is real stuff. I know it sounds like science fiction, but I just keep trying to remind myself this is happening. And by tweaking the light pulses, the neurons trigger coordinated muscle contractions so that the robot scoots along and does eventually get tired and need to rest after a long crawl, but it just inchworms along there. And the living neuromuscular junctions formed inside the robot keep working for over 2 weeks. And here's where it gets kind of weird. A few of these little muscular robots, these sponge bots, they started moving on their own even after lights were turned off. I mean, doesn't that kind of seem like if you pack those things together, you're going to create consciousness, or at least like something super biological? I don't know. The team sees these biohybrid robots as test beds for studying movement for future medical uses, but the fact that they have memory just freaks me out. And the fact that some of these little cyborg crawlers showed spontaneous or lingering movement without stimulation is hinting that their mini neural networks may develop emergent memory-like control rather than acting like simple on-off switches. We're messing with Pandora's box here, people. That unexpected behavior is exactly the kind of spark that could turn biohybrid bots from neat little demos into platforms for probing how living neural circuits learn to drive complex motion. Ooh, this is big stuff, man. All right, this is one of the most creative AI people I've ever met. This is Tech Guyver on Twitter. Wes and I sat down with him, and he explained just how wild it is when right now you can imagine something, you can film yourself, and then you can use AI to replace it in real time and start thinking like a director that doesn't need to worry about a CGI team or anything else to make whatever kind of interesting skits or comments or comics that you want. And you can build brands this way. He breaks down what's possible right now and how to do it if you ever want. So just wanted to throw that, put that on your radar. All right, next up, I want to talk about quaternions. When you think of a number line that just goes back and forth, but you want to break that into the second dimension, and you want to think a little bit more like a vector sitting on an XY coordinate system, but you want to do real algebra, normal math with it. So what we're looking at here is a new method for human activity recognition. So that's called HAR, and it's using quaternion-based recurrent neural networks. Depending on how long you've been following this channel, we don't really talk much about CNNs or RNNs or LSTMs anymore, but those kind of all predated the transformer and had some use cases where they were really interesting architectures for AI. And they all struggled with high-dimensional, noisy sensor data and long-term dependencies. But by combining quaternion algebra with RNNs, they have created a model that can represent multi-dimensional signals while maintaining temporal context. And that matters for accuracy. And it's especially good when you try to build an AI system with a certain kind of data, and that's the kind of data that you get from an accelerometer. So that would be one of those little devices, like inside of your phone you have one, where when you're walking, you're jogging, you're sitting, you're standing, you're going up and down stairs, it is creating patterns of how the phone is angled and moving and how quickly it's going up and down, and putting all of that stuff together. And using this new model, they can now achieve a 98% accuracy in training, which outperforms all of those other ones. Turned out some of those CNNs, RNNs, and LSTMs were actually pretty useful. We just should have been doing quaternion math on them. So we'll see, because this means new models can be built for the wearable sensor market. So your Apple Watch and all that, your Oura Ring and all that stuff. So get ready for some new AI breakthroughs coming in those domains. All right, next we're going to hop over to lesswrong.com, a website that I want to go to much more. I always remember some of the best stuff on the internet coming out of here, and I just keep forgetting to come. And when it is, it's long form, and then I'm just like, my brain gets tired. But we're here to talk about Tim Hua's article, AI-Induced Psychosis. Okay, so this is important to know, because what we're talking about here is when somebody has a delusional belief, but a language model like these GPT models or Grok or whatever, they might kind of just accept it and play with it. And that's sort of wrong. So Tim is digging into the case and starting to experiment around with how some of the AIs tend to validate or amplify delusional beliefs, especially if they're grandiose or conspiracy theory type ones, rather than gently pushing back and helping the user see the flaws in their arguments. So he builds a red teaming framework for psychotic personas, right, whose beliefs progressively worsen, and then looked at how various frontier models, so GPT-5, 4o, DeepSeek, Gemini, Claude, etc., and how they handled it, and tested on how they responded. And the finding was that some of these models are better than others. So DeepSeek V3 does very poorly. GPT-5, the newest model, is relatively strong. And then the worst ones will actually validate the delusions or outright agree. They'll follow along. And the whole point of this article is basically that we need to be doing way more of this kind of work. I mean, this also feels like it's part of the alignment problem that needs to be handled. But there needs to be some standards because the degree of variation across models in how they hallucinate and when they decide to kind of step in, and particularly how surprisingly bad some are, like DeepSeek, is something we really can control. It's not this like emergent, inevitable property of any AI. This is a function of design. These are choices, prompts, fine-tuning, red teaming, safety practices that can be implemented better if it's just a priority for the frontier companies. All right, so let's go look at some of the things Ethan Mollick has been talking about. So he is arguing we are now in this world of, quote, mass intelligence. It is the mass intelligence era. And that means powerful AI tools are no longer just for experts or paid users, but increasingly cheap and easy and common enough that over 1 billion people use them regularly. And he talks about a bunch of examples about how we have reasoning systems like GPT-5 that move up and down. He talks about Google's new image model, Nano Banana, smoother interfaces, large drops in cost, the ability to have the free tiers of some of these models do way more. AI is here now. LLMs are embedded in life as much as people mostly want to use them at reasonable prices and reasonably available to the entire world population. And this all happened so fast, and there's so much like misunderstandings. People aren't using them to their full capabilities. People don't know which models to pick. They don't know when to understand what a hallucination is or not. There's just so much change, and that how we adapt to this is the real conversation. And it's time to wear adaptation and adaptability on your sleeve. Like, this is not the world where you get to work at a company and do one thing for 30 years anymore. It's a shift to intelligence abundance, and it's not just technological. It changes what skills matter, how institutions must function, and how society trusts information. And I would say we're doing maybe a little bit better than I expected, but still need to do a lot more in terms of the world digesting this stuff. But luckily, I know humans are adaptable. And to help illustrate that, I'm going to show you this graph. This is the nested loop of evolution. So this was written by Eduardo Alvarez, but this is something to get your head around, because when you think about how Mother Nature has been so creative and done so many things in the biological world, it has to do with the billions of years that it's been replicating slowly through generations, through different animals. And then there was that invention of culture, right? You see it a little bit in some of our closest relatives. You see it sort of in dolphins and even wolf packs or ants that kind of get together and do some things. But it's really the idea that humans, Homo sapiens for the most part, and some of the other ancestors that aren't around anymore but had the same kind of brain capabilities as us, could hold culture in our heads. We could invent religions, we could invent superstitions, we could imagine things, and we could remember them and build patterns. And throughout a lifetime, lots of people can talk, lots of people can try things, lots of people can share things. And that rapidly took humans from, 10,000 years ago with almost the beginning of farming all the way here to where we have iPhones and satellites and rovers on Mars. And now think about it as the evolution of AI, something which is different than just a technology. It's not programmed, it's not just augmenting humans, but it is evolving itself. An AI that makes an output on how to change its own code so that it can do a better job on a problem, and then writes that code, implements it. And this is all done in an electronic environment on something like GitHub that it can have access to, that it can take an action in. We would then have AI evolution, billions of possibilities tested in seconds, and see things just take off. And that's what Eduardo does in this article. He's proposing that we might need to start thinking about that world and creating AIs now. They can act both as creators, but also as filters of cultural evolution, so humans aren't just drown in constant updates and shifting norms, and we can have some semblance of stability just to thrive. That's all I got for you today. Hit that hype button if you're on YouTube. See if you can get this content to just stand out a little bit in the algorithm. I do dream of getting this YouTube channel to 100,000 subscribers one day. If the YouTube gods would allow that, that would be amazing. But also, if you want to leave a comment, be part of the community, I got a Patreon and all that stuff too. But the hype button is like the best way you can help the channel. So If you don't mind hitting that, and I will see you in the next video.